Welcome back to Grace Begins podcast. I'm Catherine Sutherland, and this is my beautiful co-host, Kathy Cardenas. And we have a wonderful guest today. Would you like to share a little bit about him?
Yeah, I am super excited. I came across this gentleman on social media after another friend reposted something with him, and I was just really inspired, and I thought we need to know more. So I want to welcome Brody Jessee, who is a professional baseball player, and he's joining us today because I think it's so important to bring so many great stories of where people found God on their journey and turn their lives over to Him, and this is going to be a great story. So I'm super excited. So welcome, Brody, to the Grace Begins podcast.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about you. I know you are in Cincinnati or Ohio now with the team there, but tell us like the beginning. Take us back to the beginning of Brody.
Baby Brody.
Yeah, baby Brody. Growing up, and prior to when you've taken this big, new leap and this new path. So tell us about that.
So I grew up in Anchorage, Alaska. For a baseball player, that's kind of out there. But I had a great family. My mom and dad they followed Christian beliefs, but we didn't grow up going to church or reading the Bible or anything. And so it was just kind of like a foundation of really good morals. And so I'm grateful that my family is just, they're very sweet. And I'm lucky to have them. And our family up there is tight knit because it's just Alaska. So there's like 8 or 9 of us. So like I'm getting married this December and my family list was 9 people. And it's just, we're really tight knit. It's like one big family with my grandparents and my aunt and uncle and their 2 little cousins. Saves
a lot of money.
Yeah.
And so baby Brody just played a lot of baseball and didn't really think about a whole lot else and just wanted to make it to the next level at any costs. And so I ended up going to Gonzaga, which is a Division I in Spokane, and for a few years played there. And then I eventually got drafted out of Gonzaga to Cincinnati Reds. And I'm currently with their minor league teams right now. I'm in high A with the Dayton Dragons. But the part where God entered kind of the story I had from my life was it kind of started in high school, my senior year. I'd gone to a few youth groups and stuff with some of my friends at church. And one of the guys I looked up to that was a couple years older than me was playing baseball at a junior college. And I'd grown up playing with this guy since I was like 8 years old. And he was a strong believer. He was one of the nicest people that I'd ever met. And he just had he had really strong faith. Like he would share it with everybody. He'd want people to come to church. He had, John 3:16, wherever he could write it, he was writing it. Mm-hmm. And he was at his junior college in California and was skateboarding on the sidewalk, and a 16-year-old drunk driver crossed over a median and killed him. And I was at school when I found out, and his brother was in my class, and it was terrible. Like there's a lot of questions, and like his family's reeling with the faith and why would God let this happen? And his brother was kind of already on the fence about like, am I a Christian? Am I not? Like, what does it mean for me? And it was hard for him to continue down that path. And it was just like kind of one of these like instant moments where everybody's questioning what's going on in the world. Why would such a bad thing happen to such a great person? And, but the one thing that always stuck with me from that was like, he always was saying John 3:16 or writing it anywhere. And it was important because I got to college and I met my now fiancée the first day of school, and she grew up Catholic, but she was kind of like asking questions about faith and what is God really? And is it just the church or is it a relationship? And how does this look for my life? And I'd met her and she was just asking all these questions about faith that made me ask questions about faith. And every time we would have a conversation about it, I would see John 3:16 somewhere. And it was like in small ways, like on someone's Instagram bio from a random person I didn't know following me, to like, I would literally be thinking about it walking back home from campus, and I would turn the corner and like John 3:16 was written out in chalk on the ground.
Wow.
And it was just like, I was running into it everywhere. And it was just kind of like, it was to me almost like God tying in that, like the pain of losing someone that was like really important, to like centering it back to him and like his grace. Because like the verse, every believer knows it. It's like, anybody who believes is saved. Like that's the crux of like our faith in Christ. And like, that just like drew me to God. That was a turning point. And I had a bunch of different teammates. I was lucky on my team at Gonzaga, a lot of really strong believers that would, bring me to church, and they would walk through some like, what does it mean to be a Christian, or how do you even know this is real? And it's just not some story that's made up, and just walking through everything. And I had an agent, Randy Rowley, who reached out, who's a Christian, and he's the one that brought me to the pro athlete organization there with the Increase Conference, where every year all the MLB players come together and we just worship for a few days. And we have a couple pastors fly in. Like last year we had Matt Chandler and Ben Stewart come and talk. And it was just this whole thing where it was like my life was headed in one direction, and God placed these people in my life to just slowly like point me to him, regardless of what was happening. And it was just amazing.
She calls those destiny helpers.
Yeah.
The people that are placed in your life. And when you look back, you're like, oh, I had to meet them to get to this point in my relationship with God.
They redirect you. They are the people that set you on that path. And we don't always see them in the moment, but looking back, you're like, yeah, that was the person, that was the thing. And I love that about the John 3:16. I just think he's doing, I love God. He's just always in this place where he's just doing everything he can to make sure that we are on this right path, that he is just like, you always describe it as like we're like toddlers, what I mean? Oh, go this way, go, get back up, he's just guiding us all the time. And I think it's just beautiful that he's not forgotten us. It's beautiful actually. So yeah. All right. So tell us, after that, sorry, we chimed in there.
No, it's okay. So so after the college thing, I started, just as those things were happening, I eventually was like, you know what? I think I'm Christian. I think that's what I've been led to here. And I just started reading the Bible because I'd never read it. And that was like, when I read through the Gospels was the first time I was like, oh my gosh, this is the God that everybody was talking about. Like just the things that, like all the prophecies fulfilled from the Old Testament. There's like over 250 like explicit prophecies already that are just like lined out, in the way that Jesus lived his life and the way he died and was resurrected, and all the people that saw him. Like, it's just like an amazing story that like, it's not just like a fantasy or a fable, but was like, these are like historical people living in Judea. And they're like, yeah, I saw this guy and he did these amazing things. And then they're writing to some other buddy that they're like, did you see what this guy did?
Over
and like,
500 people.
All these things. God brought them together.
Yeah. And people from
amazing.
All different countries and walks of life and had the same experiences. There's so much archaeological evidence to prove that he existed. And yet people don't want to, like, he's the most famous character in history, the most beloved, really, and people don't want to acknowledge his existence. It's crazy.
I think that they know and they want to. I think sometimes it's work. It's not easy to be a follower of Christ. I think that we see that on a regular basis. It's with guests that we have, it's not always easy to take that stand to be that guy that says, no, I'm going to do this, and I feel like God is turning a lot of hearts. So we're seeing a lot more people come forth than we have in the past. But I do think he's bringing his flock home. I feel like he's right now, and we've talked about that in the past. He's calling his soldiers, and I love it. I think it's beautiful. And obviously he called you because you felt that spirit and decided to become Christian, and it sounds like you took it to the next step too.
Yeah. I was definitely, he left the 99 for me. It's kind of how I feel. At one point in my life, I really was like atheist. I was like, there's no God. Science is the answer for everything, and we know everything. And I had these neighbors growing up it was a pastor at the local church and his kids, and we'd always argue. I was like, Big Bang, like there's no God. And it was just cool to see like while I was, because in college I was studying medicine. So while I was learning science, I was learning how much we didn't know. And then I was looking at the order and design of everything. And I was like, this is insane. Like, there's no way this came from nothing and magically became the most ordered thing we've ever seen. Like, it just doesn't, that's not how it works. And it was just cool that like, while I'd held those beliefs and then studied what I thought to be true, I was like disproving it And while I was being introduced to God and what he's done and like his works, that it was continually proving itself to be trustworthy. That was like happening simultaneously. And that was just interesting for me to work through as like someone who's more like cerebral than just like, oh, I believe whatever you say. It was like, it's undeniable that God exists and that Christ came down and lived the perfect life, died for us, and was resurrected so that if we believe in him, we're saved.
I think because you're a science-minded person, I think that actually can be a great way for you to share your faith with people, because you have taken the time to show factual evidence or factual proof. It's not just like a feeling. There's actually proof. And that's great that your mind wanted to pursue that. You know, I was the same way as you. I hadn't read the Bible fully cover to cover until last year, and I'm almost 50 years old. So I think oftentimes I would go and I would cherry pick, you know, like, oh, I'm going to read the book of James or I'm going to read, you know, the book of John or whatever I felt I needed in my life at that moment. But there's something so important to see that the through line of like you're saying, the prophecies and the providence of God from the beginning to the end. It's been so eye-opening for me and so validating. I always stuck with the New Testament because I love Jesus, and I felt like that was resonated with me more. But I was missing out on so much from the Old Testament. So yeah, it's interesting how it, and every time you read it, there's something new that's revealed, you know?
Yeah, I think it was really cool. My fiance and I were reading through the Bible in like 2 years is kind of our plan. And we have a little plan of like what chapters to read by day. And like the coolest thing was reading through Deuteronomy and Numbers and everything, where it's just a lot of like, sacrifice this, like here's your grain offering and here's your sin offering, and thank it. Just going through everything.
Yeah.
And you sit there, you're like, how do they keep up with this? Like, this is not sustainable. And like, that was kind of the point. It's like to be separated from other people, and then it's not sustainable. So where's the ultimate sacrifice? Like, it's just another direct line of like, there's Jesus, like Isaac going up to the mountain, and then God like bringing his own sacrifice between the bushes, the ram, and being like, here, like, you're not going to sacrifice your son today. It's like, well, we know when he sacrificed his only son, like now that we're reading it way in the future, we actually know what happened. It's just like, it's so cool to see how God was writing the story, like, you know, 4,000, 6,000 years ago, and had a plan for us now. It's just incredible.
It is so amazing. Yeah. And that is still so relevant. That story is still so relevant.
It's one of my favorite stories. And I call it the Abrahamic faith. And sometimes I'm like, that's the kind of faith
he's calling
and
for.
I'm thankful God does not throw that on me, that I have to, he tests that kind of faith. I mean, it is tested in lots of ways, but that's the kind of faith you have to be at. That's the next level, but it's beautiful.
Knowing that he's going to fulfill. Like
knowing and trusting. I think it's to me, that story is about trust. Trust in God. Trust in God. If he's calling you to do it, there is a reason. Or, you know, we have to, it's just hard. We talked about that before, that blind faith. And it is actually one of my favorite stories, because it is that reminder of what I try to want to be. I don't know. I think we're human at the same time, and it's hard to just 100% always keep on that path with him and that faith. And so I think it's beautiful. I'm so glad you brought that story up, because it's just one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing that kind of stuck out to me when you said that too is like, you just said you love God. You know, you're like, I love God. It's like an overwhelming love of him. And there was something at the conference this year that North Point Worship was doing our worship. And the guitarist kind of stood out and was like, there's something that one of our band members said, like, it's only hard to surrender when you don't know how good God is. And that's like the basis of that story. Was like, Abraham knew how good God was. And so he was like, you know, I can go up here in full faith knowing that God will provide. And that kind of just like hits home when you look at that from that perspective. You're like, if I just remember how good God is, like, there's nothing he won't do, and it's going to be for his good. So I can just surrender what I have to him.
Yeah. And he can work through, well, he's shown in the Bible too, he can work through anybody. If he can work through Pharaoh and Nebuchadnezzar and all these evil kings, he can work through anybody. And we forget that. We forget that he sees the big picture. He sees the full picture. We see this much of his plan. So yeah, it's hard sometimes because we don't know what's coming. We don't know what's ahead. And it's really hard to just step off the cliff sometimes and go, like take that breath and just know that he's going to catch you. It's really challenging.
And knowing, and I think that for me, I've always, and I, you still struggle when you're in that moment, you know what I mean? You're trying to surrender it all, but you're still trying to pull it back. And, but it's like, that's why I said, I just love God, because He's done too many great things in my life and too many miracles. And there's been too many moments that I can't not praise him and thank him. I know it's him, he shows me it's him. And so I feel like that's why I have to remember back to those moments that he got me through those things that I didn't think he was going to get me through. And it's like, that's what he's going to do this time too. He's going to do it every time. He always shows up. Always. And it's like, it may not be in that second I want it because I got to learn something, but he always shows up. And that is beautiful because that is the one person in your life that is always going to show up. And that's, I guess I feel like, I'm grateful for good people in my life and this and that, but I don't feel like I'm a person in my life that has 1,000 people that got my back. You know what I mean? I just don't feel that way. But I mean, you got your close people, but I feel like with God, he always does. And that to me is the greatest hope.
He's reliable.
Everything.
Yeah, he's reliable. He's not going to disappoint you.
Yeah.
Humans will.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's why to me, it's like, people get so crazy in the world today. We were talking about something earlier today and I'm like, here's where I look at it. I just keep my eyes on God because everything else is going to be crazy both ways. As long as I keep my focus on him, that's going to keep me calm. I can't go wrong here. If I start going here or there, right or left, like this is where the focus has to be.
Yeah.
And it's hard not to get distracted. We all get distracted with worldly things. And, but yeah, his love is beautiful. And I'm so glad that you got to see that and understand that. And that, we share so many stories of people that get to see where that, I don't know. I guess there's people who will never see it. And then there's people who take it for granted because they've had it their whole lives. So I think sometimes those valleys and peaks are good because he has to bring you down sometimes to grab your attention. And so I think it's beautiful however he does it.
It's great that you have in the sporting industry, it's great that you have a community of believers around you to keep you on track, because it could be really challenging to just be in an environment where that's just not, we've talked to actors and people in Hollywood that have found that is so important to keep them in line because it's so easy to get swept away by the world. So I'm glad that you found that early in your career too.
I'm very grateful for it as well. Yeah, it's one of those industries where in sports or Hollywood or anything where basically your value is based upon worldly things.
Yeah.
It's hard to separate your value. It's hard to differentiate between your value in God and your value in your job if your job is everything you're working for every day. And especially when you're surrounded by people where that's their number one priority is to achieve the things they want to achieve so that they can get the worldly gain. And so the balance of that it's like really crucial to have believers. And I'm grateful for the team that I have here. There's a lot of believers on the team and we have a Bible study and we talk every week. We're just working through the chapter of James and what it means to really act like a Christian and how your heart is turned to God and what that looks like. And it's kind of a hard one to read.
It's very confronting.
Just because it's calling you out on everything.
He doesn't mince his words. That's for sure. He's like, this is what you're going to do. And this is how you're supposed to do it.
Yeah.
Exactly. But it's the stuff we need to hear.
Yeah.
It's, a lot of eyes are on us all the time. And it's a fact that if you aren't living the way that Christ would like you to, that it's going to lead to death. And it's just something that we have to keep in check, but it's a lot easier to do it with other believers because you can talk to each other, you can pray for each other, you can, call each other out if you're not doing it, not in a mean way, but just in a loving, hey, get back on the saddle, bud. You were going good for a while. And it's just really, I'm really grateful for that community of believers that we have throughout the whole professional baseball system.
So what led you to, when you recently got baptized, what led you to that decision? And has that changed has that ignited more faith in you, that decision?
So the first time I went to this the baseball conference was 2 years ago in November. And at that one, I was really compelled to be baptized because I hadn't yet, but I had kind of professed my faith, but I hadn't taken the step to baptism. And I just didn't get baptized. I just like was kind of scared, or I just wasn't quite ready, I guess. And one person that I really wanted to be there was my fiancée, Lyza, because she was so instrumental in my faith. And I just wanted her to be there. And I wanted someone that had been on the journey with me to be there. And thankfully she was able to go the next year with me. And so it was just like the perfect opportunity to get baptized. Really where my like faith was sealed was at that conference a couple years ago, where, I was just like feeling God, like in everybody I talked to and all the amazing like charities that were there and all the amazing pastors and believers that were in baseball. You just like, you see the way that God changes people, and you just see the way people act when their love and their identity is in God. And that was just so evident that I was like, yeah, this is what I want. Like, I want to follow Christ the way these people follow Christ. And so when I went back that second time, or this past year in November, I was like, it's time to get baptized, and it's time to do it where my faith was solidified, with the woman that helped me the most in my faith, and who will continue to help me in my faith for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
It was just kind of perfect.
That's beautiful. And so something that I've been seeing a lot of too is a lot of these revivals where these youth are just being baptized by the thousands. And I feel like Christ is touching everyone's heart right now. I feel like this is like, I guess I think it's as a last call, right? Like it's his last call. Like he's doing everything he can to get people. What do you think? What's your thought on that with a lot of these youth? Do you think, obviously a lot of the world's going one direction, but I think a lot of people are saying, no, I see what's going on. I'm following. I'm going the right here. I'm going with God. Do you see that a lot in your, you're a little younger than us.
No.
No.
I'm 21.
I do think I see it. I think there is some sort of revival, or just, I think we're at the point in history where there is a lot of evidence for God, and we keep finding more and more evidence for God. The more archaeology happens, or just, we keep finding more manuscripts. We're like, wow, this is the same. Like there's a lot of that. I think there's a lot of, right now we have a lot of people kind of making up their own rules and saying this is what's best for others. And I think when we slowly go further secular, we can look at history and be like, well, that didn't work out for these people. And we just start to examine, like, as our generation would just examine, like, is this really in our benefit, or is there something better? And a lot of people that ask that question tend to land on, there is something better, and that person's Christ. And I think that's happening a lot. And I think it's just, Christ is like the foundation of truth and love and mercy and grace and everything good. And I think when people are starting to ask questions about the world that's going on around us, I think it continues to lead them to Christ.
Yeah, I think in today's world too, I think people, I was reading something about that the other day, that somebody was saying that there's the hole inside of you cannot be filled by one thing in the world. The hole is there for Christ. That's what that hole is there for. And that's where he belongs.
That's why you see some of the most successful people in the world, and they're so unhappy because there's just there's something that faith gives you that is so grounding and so honest and true, and helps you be able to handle those storms that come into your life in a way that is like you were saying, this blind faith or trust. Like, I know I'm going to get through this. God's going to give me the strength to get through this. But when you don't have that, it's like you're kind of floundering, like one of those things. What are those outside the car? They're like
inflatable tube.
That. You're like that. You're just blown and tousled, and there's not like a grounding to you. So it's. I'm very grateful for that strength, because I really couldn't do it. I couldn't do life without him by my side.
It would be sad. It would be very, very sad to not have. It's just a love. You just feel like your countenance changes when you're loved by him, when you realize you're loved by him. Like, you've been loved by him the whole time, but we don't always see it. That moment you realize that love, And that's where I think the grace comes in. And that's why, this podcast is Grace Begins. I grew up in a faith where a religion that you were never taught about grace. I never learned grace until I was an adult. I was taught about works and money. Like you got to pay and work your way to heaven. Well, that's a lot.
It's a lot of pressure.
I'll never be good enough. You'll never be good enough. And it was sad that a religion that cares so much more about money and control didn't allow you to have the greatest gift, which is God's grace. God's grace is sufficient. It will carry you. It is, I think, I get emotional about it, but it's like, I think it's the most beautiful gift he can give us. And too often, too many people miss out on that. Too many people get caught up in these religions and so many parts of it. And I'm like, it's so simple. So when I, left that church, I went out and bought a Bible and I just took this journey with just me and him, just me and Jesus on this journey. No one else. And it ended up being the most beautiful journey and the most beautiful place when you really, really get to know him one-on-one and his love, understanding his sacrifice. It's beautiful. And but I feel like me too. I feel like he left those 99 for me too. That's what's so beautiful about it. That's just a kind of unconditional love that I'm glad that I saw coming at me. I'm glad you saw it. We know so many people have seen it. And I think it's happening to more and more people. I think that he's leaving the 99 and coming one by one to bring us home.
I also have really noticed like there's like a real stigma around Christianity at the moment of this. It's just got such a bad rap because people are getting very stuck in the law and this is what you're supposed to do, this kind of legalistic approach to everything because they feel like they have to fight for God, and it's become the like a lack of grace for others. So I just keep being reminded of like how Jesus lived his life. He came as a servant. He came to serve the brokenhearted, and he surrounded himself with the discarded of society and the ones that nobody wanted and the ones that were judged. And we need to be doing that as Christians. We need to be loving and not condemning. God is the judge, not us.
Yeah.
And it frustrates me because I think a lot of Christians are afraid to say they're Christian because of that. I know I always say I don't identify as a religious person. I'm a follower of Jesus. That's my foundation. So what's your thoughts on that as a person? You have a lot of influence as a baseball player and people look up to you. What's your stance on that?
That's one of those points that's really hard to struggle with when I was first getting into Christianity, because I'd had that notion about Christians. It was just like, they go out and they yell at people who are gay, or they yell at abortion clinics, or they yell at people for not doing what they want. Or it's, the grandma like slapping you and being like, hey, stop doing that because God doesn't want you to. And it's like, it was the reprimand without love that was like getting in the way of that.
Yeah.
And like you said, like Jesus would surround himself with like the discarded in society. It's like, like he called us to go proclaim the truth and proclaim the gospel. But like, if you're going to change someone's life, you're going to go live with them. You're going to understand them as human beings. You're going to love on them. And because you love them, you're going to tell them about the cliff that's up ahead if they continue down that path. It's not just to like feel high and mighty and just call them out.
Yeah.
That's not what Jesus did. Jesus was very specific and like poignant and being like, this is happening, but because I love you and because of who I am, you shouldn't go down that path. You should trust me.
Yeah.
Just follow me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, I think that stigma is out there because there's always going to be people in any part of society that are kind of on the extreme side of things or taking things a bit further, and whether it's in good intention or not. But there is just a point of go back and read the Gospels and look at what Jesus did.
Yeah.
And just follow his example because it's literally perfect.
Yeah. And we also have to really recognize like he wants to transform our hearts first, like transforming of your heart and your spirit before you condemn and judge others, like take the plank out of your own eye, look at the plank in your own eye before you start doing that to others. I think when God or Jesus calls us out to call out sin, it's not to point a finger. It's to show truth with grace. And I think that we have to do that with our intimate groups, like with our families, with our intimate friendships. I think you can be a lot more direct with them. But to the masses, I think that your greatest gift is your testimony of showing and being a model and showing what God has done in your heart and your life.
Yeah.
Rather than just quoting the Bible and slapping slapping people around the face with religion,
Yeah.
So
I think following him is so simple. That's what I learned. I learned growing up in a religion that complicated it so much that it's like, no. And I think so many religions and religious leaders are just complicating it. It's just simple. It's just love one another, be good to one another. It's so simple, but somehow judgment, you know what I mean? People are going to be different than us. And I think it's really hard to just show that grace, and we need more of that grace. And, we all fall short of that. And I think that today is just a good reminder of people listening to show a little grace, cut people a little slack, show a little grace, because God shows it to us constantly. He gives it to us. He gives it to me for sure all the time. So it's like, I just feel like it's simple. And I feel like people miss out so much when they get so caught up into the religions and just you and him on this journey. That's why I encourage people, just go take you and him and be on this journey for a minute. Take everything else out, just you and him, and see what the difference is, because it's beautiful.
Yeah. I think that the grace comes from just loving him more. Like you said, it's kind of simple. Like if you want someone to turn their heart to Christ, you don't condemn them off the bat or quote a Bible verse if they don't even believe the Bible's true. You just show them the love of God. And then when their heart softens and God moves in, because you're planting a seed. I'm not going to be the one that converts someone to Christianity. That's God.
Right.
God shows himself to that person, and that's what happens. It's not me. So if I plant the seed of just here's God's love and God moves in, God will do the rest. It's kind of that simple.
He'll give you the words. He'll give you the right time.
Yeah.
To say what needs to be said.
Yeah.
You just don't even know what seeds you're planting either. Some things you could just be having a conversation, not even talking necessarily about God, and he will find a way.
Yeah.
It's so amazing how he does that.
Yeah. And I think that, he's going to touch people's hearts through our actions too. It drives me crazy when I see somebody out on a street corner screaming, calling everyone sinners. And I'm like, that's not how you're going to, it's something in your countenance. They're going to remember that you were the kind person, that you were the unconditional person, that you helped them in their hardest time. That those are the things they're going to remember are Christ-like versus that guy screaming on the soapbox, you know? And so I think that people, Christians need to really wake up to that too, that you're going to attract a lot more with the honey than the vinegar, right?
Yes, exactly. That's true.
Yeah. So what advice, so would you have any advice for young people who are maybe listening and who are thinking about getting baptized or any advice for someone who, or maybe somebody, I was even that's in a professional, we know a lot of Major League Baseball players and hockey players and all sorts of people that I've never heard of a program like yours. So what would you encourage somebody who's, in the sports industry or any industry that's wanting to potentially get baptized? What do you think some first steps for somebody to help them?
I would say just do it. Just get baptized.
Jump in the water.
I think it's an important step in your faith. I think it helps you to reevaluate where you're at, and just continue forward in trusting God and following Christ. I think the night of my baptism was probably the most I'd felt God's love. I got baptized and I just went on a little walk outside, and it was just overflowing of just joy, not just happiness. It was joy that lasts. And that's something that I hold on to today. It's just get baptized. If you're thinking about it, I waited a decently long time. And once I did, I was really glad I did. I think there's just, you got nothing to lose and everything to gain.
Yeah, I think I was baptized when I was 8. And sometimes I'm I was too young, and sometimes I feel like maybe I should get rebaptized again. So maybe this has inspired me. Maybe I'm going to do it, because I feel like that is something that is a beautiful moment, right? That moment. And I think when you're 8 years old, you can't you know, you can't really fully make that decision and appreciate it. Especially now, everything I've learned along the way and how my testimony has truly grown. So
yeah, it was more of a dedication. I think about that with my kids, like when they were dedicated to God as babies, but they made the decision when they wanted to follow
That's how
Jesus.
it should be.
Yeah. So
yeah, that's amazing. So what, again, I was just excited. When I saw that you got baptized, I was like, we just got to have him on, because I think that we need more people setting these examples, and showing young guys too, especially. I think anyone in your age, just normally, young men out there, they're doing the worldly things and testing the world, and they don't, even though they might know it's wrong, they don't have the strength or the courage. And I hope today, courage is a big word that we talk about on the show too, is that you've had the courage to say, no, this is what God's put on my heart, and this is what I'm doing. Because I think a lot of people have God's put it on their heart, but they just don't have the courage and the strength to just step up and say, no, I'm stepping away from all of this stuff and I'm following him. And I think that you are just a really amazing example of that. So this has been really, really amazing. Tell us a little bit tell me really quick before we let you go. I want to know this thing for baseball players that you guys do. I don't know, are there organizations like that in the NFL too, or hockey, or tell us about these. I think it's really cool.
This ministry is called Pro Athlete Outreach, and they do it with the NFL, the NHL. They're working on NBA right now, and they've got the MLB. And every year we come together for an increased conference. It happens at just some location somewhere in the country, and it changes every year. And you just go to a hotel, and you're with all of your other peers in your sport. And they bring in pastors, they bring in a worship team. So North Point Worship has done it the last few years. And it's really just talking. You get up and you praise and you talk about God, and you meet other believers, and then you talk about God more. And then they have different charities that come. And so like IJM was one of them, International Justice Mission. And they're working all over the world to go in, and it's with the child trafficking situations. And they go in and they save kids, and they train the police on how to go in and infiltrate these sites and how to catch these people and reform the laws. And their final goal is to literally not be there, and to have the justice system there taking care of this the way it should. And they bring Christ right into the middle of it. Compassion's another one that goes there, and it's their name is Compassion, like in Jesus' name. Like they are very Christ-centered.
Yeah.
And they go into all these areas and find kids in poverty or in terrible situations around the world. And you can basically sponsor a child for $45 a month. And that takes care of them and their family and all the school supplies. And they take the kids, and they have school for them. They teach them about God and his love and his grace. And they just change lives. And there's plenty of testimonies out with a bunch of kids that have gone through their programs around the world, and they're doing amazing things. It's just like they bring all of these resources in for athletes to be able to do mission trips or to donate the money that they've earned to somewhere that's really, it's going to make an impact the way that Jesus would call us to make an impact with what he's blessed us with. And it's just an amazing few days. I'm planning on going every year.
That's awesome.
It's just, it's incredible.
Yeah, to be with other, like you were saying, you commented earlier, it's when you're an athlete, you have to live and breathe it. It's like you're so immersed in your sport. It's your life, and it's very hard to be convicted in your faith when your life is so in the world like that. So I really applaud you for your strength and for seeking God like that. And you're just such a beautiful example to other young men coming up behind you that they can do this too, and I'm excited to see where God's going to lead you. And you're getting married.
Yeah, that's your first stop.
Yes.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
It's really, it becomes a lot easier with all the people around me.
It does.
And the people that God's placed in my life.
Yes.
I mean, one of the guys that I met at the conference is going to ordain my wedding. His name's Don Christensen.
That's beautiful.
There's so many connections that have happened through the ministry. And it's Jason Romano
he's amazing.
You had him on the podcast earlier. The Sports Spectrum is the media portion of the pro athlete outreach.
Oh,
and so
okay.
he's heading that.
Oh,
Yeah.
And so that's all intertwined. And it's just cool to see what God has done. Like this started in the 70s.
Yeah.
So in 50 years, like
how much it's grown.
how big this has gotten and how many people
Yeah.
this has reached. It's just incredible.
Yeah.
It's going to be cool to see what it does in the future.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, our past guest, John Schneider, he said that God is up to something. He's always up to something. And I don't know, I feel like that stuck with me in what you're saying too. God is up to something. He's doing something in all of our lives right now. And it's going to be beautiful when we see what that
How it
looks like.
unfolds.
Yeah, it's that's the best part. It's just like you're waiting for that Christmas present and then you finally get to see it. You wait all year and then it's like, that's how it is. I feel like his gift, you finally get to see what he was up to the whole time and how it all made sense. So yeah, I think it's beautiful. Well, where can people, send us the links for the charities. We'd love to share those when we put this up. And where can people follow you? You're on social media. Where's a good place to follow you?
On social media, Instagram's basically the only one I use.
Okay.
It's just Brody-Jessee.
Okay.
Or Brody_Jessee.
Yes. So to our listeners, follow Brody and see what he's up to, and feel free to message him too if you have questions or you're a pro athlete and you want to be a part of this conference. He's a wonderful example, and we're so happy we got to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, you're amazing.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Brody.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time on Grace Begins. Bye.